Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk today. The topic is the right questions, and it's about that tape that is running in the mind all the time. Not so much the internal dialogue, which is a separate thing, right? But the tape of things that need to get done. And I think we all have one of those where, sometimes like if there's a lot going on in your life, you wake up in the morning and that tape starts playing and you might you might decide, I'm getting up right now because there's so much to do. And I was writing in the essay about my own experience with that this week. My son graduated from high school on Tuesday. And, for those of you who have children, maybe who've been through this, you already know it's a very busy time leading up to that graduation. And really it's been going on since August because that's when college applications came out, and that's sort of the beginning of the process where you're looking at like, okay, what does this look like other than the transcripts that have to be uploaded and like teacher recommendations and all of that? What else is here? What are the essay questions? Like, what is it that we're looking at? So this stuff has been on my mind for almost a year. And, I want to really focus the talk, not just on people who have children and have been through this specific thing, although I'm going to talk about it because it's, I'm speaking from my own life right now. But when that internal tape is, about to shift, when maybe the things that have been on that running tape are changing, you're going through a transition, and it can be something like a new job or moving through a divorce or any of those really major changes in life. It's so interesting to kind of pause and make sure that you're asking yourself the right meaningful questions. And so that is what I wanted to dive into today, but I am going to do it through the lens of sort of like what is happening in my world right now, because I can speak to that very easily. So Tuesday morning, I woke up and I just was instantly like, remembering all the things that needed to happen on Tuesday. So my son's graduation, he had to be there like an hour before graduation in the afternoon. I also wanted to be there early so I could get online because it was sort of like first come, first served seating. We had 4 of his close friends and their families coming over after for dinner, drinks, dessert in the backyard. And so just that doesn't sound like a lot of people, but it was 25 people. And so all the sort of planning when you're having a little like party in your backyard, and then my daughter's second to last day of 9th grade and teacher gifts, and it was just like this whole. And then I'm leading a yoga retreat to Portugal, leaving on the 19th. I'm leaving a couple of days early, so like I just have a lot of things that are happening, details, and that sort of like, have I made this phone call? Have I written this email? Did that person respond yet? Do I need to follow up? And I'm someone who keeps everything. I have alerts in my phone, but I'm also human, and sometimes things don't make it into the phone, not often, but once in a while. So just that sort of mental checklist. And when you have a lot of things going on, sometimes that checklist is like, that will wake you up. You are up. You don't even need coffee. You might want it, but you don't need it. You're like wide awake. And so that is what was happening for me Tuesday morning. And, went out to the kitchen and I did make myself, I have a little ritual in the morning. I love my coffee. and you will pry the coffee from my cold dead hands. I'm pretty I'm pretty healthy, like when it comes to what I put in my body. I pay attention to that stuff because I want to feel good and I want to have sustained energy. And I certainly done, my due diligence with coffee, and I feel like there's just as much good evidence as bad, and I'm keeping it. And also some of it, for that, while we're talking about the mental, some of it is like what is meaningful to you as far as like having rituals in the morning, or like how you're starting your day, or and sometimes that also needs to go into your mix of what's good for me, right? It's not just the numbers, it's also like what mentally and emotionally fills me. And there's just something visceral for me about all of it. The coffee beans grinding, I like the sound of that, I like the smell, I like all of it. I like the the steaming cup of coffee in my hands. So all of those things are part of my morning ritual, and that's usually when I have my alone time. But what happened on Tuesday is I got up and everything's a little bit off in the schedule. And sometimes, again, we all go through these phases in life where things are just shifting and different. And so my son he didn't need to get up. He could sleep in, which was nice for him. My daughter was going to school. So I got up and I went out, but then I remembered like, oh, she has a short day. And so she doesn't need lunch. She just needs a snack. And just running through the like, okay, what time is this delivery arriving? And what time do I need to, it was just a lot. So my daughter came out to the kitchen at a certain point, and I said to her, good morning, did you sleep well and all that? And I said like, okay, so do you have your teacher cards done? And she said, yes. I said, you signed them, you wrote something personal, yes. Great. I said, you have a short day today, so you just need a snack. You don't need lunch, right? Yes. Great. Can you write a message for your brother at some point about graduation? Yes. Great. Then I said to her, okay, like, are you okay? Are you good? Are you stressed? And she just looked at me and she's like, no, you are. And I realized like, yeah. She's totally right. She's fine. I'm stressed. And it's a little bit like that thing where, certainly I think when you have children, but anyway, and you might just do this no matter what, it's this thing where like you feel cold. So then you're asking your kid if they want a sweater, so like I was projecting my stress and, and she was like, no, I'm good. So, my kids are incredibly, they're really sharp like that, and I was writing in the essay this week, which is called The Right Questions, about my son. I think he was 12, and we were having we were butting heads, and I said to him, why are you so stubborn? And he said, because you are. And I just remember in that moment, like, he's absolutely right, and I've probably been modeling that stubborn streak, and here it is being reflected back. So kids are amazing at those insights. And when for me, one of the greatest things about my children is they really do hold up a mirror, and sometimes we're in a blind spot, like we're in like a little bit of a blind spot, and they're just so good at like, hi. And so that is part of what I was really writing about, is that for the last, really the better part of 18 years now, my internal tape has had 3 people on it, right? Me and my 2 kids. And that has been like a constant. And it's not even something that I like set out to do or consciously added them to it's just a natural sort of like, okay, I am responsible for these 2 people. What do they need? And it has become such a, just a way of life and a way of being. And so I'm always thinking about who, when they were, little, like when they were really little, I had when my son was 2, I got pregnant with my daughter. So, she was born when he was 2.9, 2 years, 9 months. So there were like the mental tape when they were little is one thing, and then as they got older, and so it's all the things, right? It's all the things. It's like, what do these two other people need, and how can I be thinking ahead so that we're not caught unprepared, so that there's nothing that they need that's serious that's going to go, that's going to slip through the cracks here. And it could be things like, of course, doctor's appointments, but also things like who needs a permission slip signed, and somebody needs cupcakes for like the, class on Friday, or someone, there's like a group project and we need this particular poster board in this particular size. And like, I'm just finding out the night before, running to the art store with both kids. And I did the single mom thing for the bulk of their, young childhood. So that was just like, there wasn't anyone else who was going to be like doing that stuff. I really needed to be on top of all of that. And who needs like new shoes or pants or top because they're having a growth spurt, and who is, just like whatever it is, who has a test coming up. And what happens like when my kids were littler is like, you have usually like text chats with other moms, and that's what happened in like second grade. There were a group of us who there'd always be somebody in the chat after school. Hey, does anyone have the homework? Because, whatever, I'm just making up a name, Johnny forgot it. And then somebody would like text it into the chat, and then you could print it out. Or hey, is today a short day? Or can somebody pick up my kid because I have to take my other child to the doctor? Or, when does vacation start again? Or what is this event? And what time are we supposed to be there? All that stuff, right, is in the chat. And that chat went on for years. And that was almost like a manifestation of the mental tape. And that's then, of course, I have my own tape for my own things. Like, how am I going to find time to write in the midst of all this? Or like, when can I throw my mat down and get a practice in? How can I meditate? Like, how am I supposed to run a business and take care of two kids, and find any time to like meet a friend for coffee once in a while? Or do I even get to do that? Like all that stuff, because you're still a human being, right? In the midst of whatever roles you're playing. And so that is kind of what I'm talking about. Whatever your different roles are, I have like, for all these years, so much of my identity has been around my life as a mom, right? And they've always been my top priority since they arrived here. And then I have my creative life. And then somewhere in there, supposed to have like some kind of personal life. And I think for a lot of people, when you are inundated, that tends to be the thing that kind of like atrophies a little bit. Like, you just don't have the mental bandwidth, but also like the energetic. It's very hard to say to yourself, oh, and I'm also gonna do some things just for me. And when you are doing the single mom thing, like, good luck, right? So for a lot of my kids' early childhood, like, I was writing when they would go to sleep at night. They'd finally, go to sleep. I never had nappers. Neither one of my kids. They were like ready and open and good moods. They just did not nap. They just had energy. Occasionally somebody would like pass out in the baby carrier or whatever, but they were never kids who were going to like take a 2-hour nap. So I remember thinking with my daughter, because my son was first, I remember thinking, well, maybe she'll be a napper. I'm like, no, she's not going to be a napper. So I would do the things that I needed to do for myself after they went to sleep, which was usually like 8:30. And for example, my original blog, which I started in 2009, 2010, when I opened Yogis Anonymous, my online yoga studio. At the time, I also had a physical location. I had 2 businesses going on, which really was kind of like an accident. I had opened a physical brick and mortar yoga studio in downtown Santa Monica, and then my business partner, who is my ex-husband, at the time we were in business together, and he was like, he's very tech savvy, and he was like, we should really be like streaming classes. That would be, that would be such a great thing to pursue. So he was working on that, and I was writing this blog, and that's back when we all blogged, and so I would write after my kids went to sleep, and usually till like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and the screen would just be blurring in front of my face. And then I would go to sleep and get up at like 6:30 or 7 whenever the kids were up, and usually it was earlier than that. So it was a short amount of sleep. My sleep suffered for a long time, but that's how I got to pursue my creative life and not lose that. And so I'm like, well, if I have to choose between my creative life and sleep, I'm going to pick my creative life, So it's like, and then there's the whole thing of like, I was in business with my ex-husband for a long time, until 2017, I took over the business myself. And then there was that whole mental tape of like, can I do this? Like, can I learn all the tech part of this thing to keep going forward? And I had a lot of self-doubt, a lot of just conversation in my head, like I don't think I can do that. Like I don't know how to do that stuff. But I learned, and I learned pretty quickly. So it was just like a story I was telling myself, and there were some other factors there too. It wasn't just me doubting my abilities. There were other factors in the mix that were kind of like, perhaps not so confident that I could like do it all myself. And, so it was rough. I had to kind of really work on that. And that is part of like the running tape and the mental load that we're carrying is all the things that we're trying to figure out. How am I going to accomplish this? And I've got a certain amount of time and a certain amount of energy, and those things are both finite. How can I sort of like fit everything in? And then there are priorities, and a lot of the time you're making choices. Like you're not going to be able to do every single thing that you're trying to do. And in that case, here's part 2, is like that inner voice. And I do think that in order to have this conversation, although I wasn't writing about that too much in the essay, I do want to talk about like the quality of your inner dialogue. And, we all are familiar with the term inner critic. And I remember reading years ago, and I'm not going to remember who said this, but she was like the editor of a parenting magazine. And she said, the way you speak to your children becomes their inner voice. And I remember thinking like, whoa, because like I was thinking about my own inner voice, and I had a very loud inner critic, shaming, relentless, unforgiving inner critic. And I would berate myself for mistakes, little, big, whatever, all day long. And I mean, really, like if I took a right and I should have taken a left, it would be like just this barrage of expletives, like, inside my head. I try to keep it kind of clean here on the podcast because I don't know if you have like small people around listening in or whatever. So I'm trying to keep it clean for now. But it was not a pretty voice happening inside my head. It was really harsh and shaming, and that takes such a toll, especially when you're like already maxed out, right? You're like you're at the height of like what you can possibly be juggling and handling, and to have a voice inside your head that is tearing you down when you don't get every single thing done, it's brutal, and it's exhausting, and it's debilitating. So I, at a certain point, became really aware, and so much of it is ingrained. You're talking to this voice in your head, right? And so you become so accustomed to it that unless you kind of step back and think about, okay, wait a second, if I heard one of my friends talking to themselves this way, would I be horrified? Like if we could each hear the inner voice of the people closest to us, and I mean just for like 10 minutes, because I don't think any of us would really want to have that be a thing. But like, if somebody could hear my inner voice, someone who cares about me, if they would be horrified by the quality, the way that I'm speaking to myself, that's like a really good thing for me to work on, because that voice is inside my head all day, every day, all night. Finally, maybe when I go to sleep, that voice is quiet for a little while, but then who knows what comes out in my subconscious. Like, my mind is not going to get a break, and I'm not going to get a rest unless I intentionally figure out how to create that. And so that's just, I wanted to just highlight that for a minute so that you can think about the way that you talk to yourself. Sometimes it slips out. I hear people as I'm moving around in the world, somebody will say, "Oh, I'm such an idiot. I blah, blah, blah." And I'm thinking, "Oh yeah, you're probably someone whose inner voice is pretty harsh." If that's coming out of your mouth right now over a tiny little mistake or oversight, imagine what is happening inside your mind. So I do think that's a really good thing for everyone to just stick a little pin in that and think about it. And if you do have a harsh inner critic, and I don't think, by the way, that it's all about the way that our parents spoke to us. I think sometimes there's that nature versus nurture thing, and sometimes you might just be someone who is very exacting, or things happen out in the world that make you feel like you've got to work harder, or you don't deserve a break, or no compassion for you, kind of a thing. And I started writing an essay. I've been doing this a lot lately. I'll start writing something and then I just delete it, or I'm just not feeling it. But I did start by talking about the inner voice. And when I first started practicing yoga, I was 20. And I remember not taking child's pose. I remember that I would not allow myself to take child's pose, even though I was new and the teacher would say, if you need a rest, put your knees down. My internal voice was like, not for you. Other people deserve compassion. You don't get to put your knees down. And when I did some teacher training, I decided I wanted to teach. I would tell people all the time, put your knees down. If you're turning purple and you can't breathe, you put your knees down. Just come back to your breath, just remind yourself, you're here to really cultivate kindness and compassion and patience. Go ahead and put your knees down. But even then, even when I was saying it for other people, I would not allow myself to actually put my knees down in a class, because I thought, well, I'm teaching, I can't even get back into the mindset that I was in then. I just would not allow myself any grace or any kind of rest, and that was a very familiar stance for me for many, many years, decades really, where I just wouldn't give myself a break or wouldn't extend myself the same level of care or compassion that I would extend to anyone else, even a stranger. So it was a good awakening for me when I realized that, and maybe that's something that speaks to you. And for me, I can tell you, when I realized that that's what I was doing, that's a huge part of what I did on my yoga mat. I would just say to myself, because there's that whole thing, how you do anything is how you do everything. And that's also a workbook. I've never done the workbook, but I love the quote. But the idea is that if you are, harsh and exacting and unforgiving, generally, that's gonna follow you all over the place. So it's not just when you're at work, it's also on your yoga mat, it's also in your conversations, it's also in your parenting. You're gonna be harsh and unforgiving when you make a mistake, and that's such a great thing to really look at. And for me, that's what I would do. I'd get on my mat and I would say, okay, I am going to really make my practice, obviously aside from focusing on my breath and staying present and curious from moment to moment, if that inner voice pops up and is critical, because maybe I feel tired today, or I feel tight in my body, or I fall out of a pose, if that voice pops up and says something that is not encouraging and kind, I'm not going to feed that. I'm going to replace that thought with a different one, with a loving, encouraging, inner best friend kind of voice. And I did that for years, because if your inner voice is harsh, that took years to develop. That's become a habit, and it's going to take time to change it up. But that is one of the most worthwhile pursuits I know of, because there is no escaping that voice inside your head. So you want to make it, a compassionate voice. And I have done that. I am still someone who I have to watch. It's a daily practice, because if I've got a list of like 28 things to do and I manage to do 27, my wiring is going to be like, oh, but you didn't do that one thing. And if I don't catch myself, I'll start beating myself up for like, you didn't get it all done. But I know that about myself, and I've been doing this work for so long that I do catch myself, and I don't allow myself to do that. I really pick up my mind and make myself focus on all the things I did manage to do. And if I didn't get them all done perfectly, but I got them done, and they're like, I make myself, focus on that. Like, hey, it's okay. Just the way I would talk to any of my close friends. Like, you're doing great, just take some deep breaths. You're doing great. Tomorrow's another day, and like that. And that is the kind of voice that you really, it's a game changer when you have that voice inside your head. So I have this internal tape going on. Son is graduating. Daughter's like second to last day of school. My retreat coming up next week, like all these different things. And there is a certain level of like, okay, is everything going to get done? And that's how I operate. And some of that is okay with me. Like I like that I can be type A in the sense that I tend not to forget details. And I do tend to, I think also, and these are just like the silver lining of growing up in a lot of chaos and with trauma, is like you are very regularly on high alert. And so you're constantly kind of looking for danger. Now, you don't want to live like that. That's not how we want to be walking around in the world. Like, oh, where's the danger possibly coming from? But the good side of it, if you can, rework that and kind of like reframe it, is what's coming and what can I do? I know I can't control everything, and everything might not unfold exactly the way that I would like it to, or that I hope it does. But what can I do in thinking ahead to make it as likely as possible that things are going to go well for everyone? What am I able to control, and what am I able to manage? And so that is like an upside. I don't think you have to get rid of everything. You just kind of look at like what parts of this tendency that I have are useful and what parts are not helping me at all. And that's the stuff that you want to try to like not feed. So all of that. But the bigger conversation that I want to be having here is these giant life transitions, and because they affect that inner tape that you have going. And so I am now coming to the end of the chapter, or like this, the act, let's call it, where that mental tape needs to have 3 people on it, because my son is going to be going up to college in September. Now, it's not to say he's not still going to be on my tape, because believe me, he's going to be on my tape for as long as I'm alive. But he doesn't need me to be, he will not need me to be doing things like thinking about, hey, would it be helpful to him if I threw in a load of laundry? Or does he have something online that he needs to do, like a deadline coming up? Or does he, and again, these are things he's already taking on for himself, but we're in that transition phase where, I'm like a safety net, just making sure I check in. And 99% of the time, if I say to him, hey, did you remember to, he's like, yes, I did. So once in a blue moon, he's like, oh, I'm so glad you asked me. So that's where we are, he and I. We're in this like shifting mode of being together in this relationship. And eventually he'll be up at school, and for the first time in his life, and for the first time in like almost 18 years, he'll be living not in the house with me. And so I will know what he shares with me, but I won't know all the things that are happening in his life from that same bird's eye view that I've had all this time. And I will be there to help when he needs help and asks for help, but I won't always be able to look ahead and see what's coming for him and ask him, hey, have you done this, or are you doing that? And it's good that I won't. It's good, because this is the transition, for the next like 4 years between like living at home and living at college. it is like a safety net, right? Like your bills are paid, you're safe, you're somewhere where you're being fed, and you've got your shelter, and you've got this great opportunity to absorb knowledge from amazing people. But you're also trying to figure out, how do I manage my time, and when do I need to do my laundry, and like how do I budget here so that like whatever my spending money is, I'm not running out of it week one, and all that stuff, right? And other things like interpersonal relationships, and talking to professors, and pursuing like office hours, and all these things where you're like trying to figure out, how do I thrive in this world, and also for like your kids to figure out what are the things that I can control and what are the things that I can't control. And my daughter's 3 years behind. She's going to be in the graduating class in 3 years. And I know now everything goes so fast, as everyone says to you if you have kids, but even if you don't, people are telling us all the time, life is short. Especially older people are telling us, and a lot of time we're like, okay. But because it doesn't feel that way when you're a kid. But as you start to get older, the birthdays, they just come faster and faster, and you realize. And so I know 3 years is going to go in a flash, and then she's going to be kind of like launching, right, and heading out to college. And so it's this very interesting time of, which I don't think I was expecting, of like, wow, this is really interesting. Like what is that inner tape of mine that's been so filled with their daily needs and rhythms and things that are happening? Like, I'm going to have some space there on that tape. And what do I want to like start prioritizing more, focusing on more? And like, what do I want that next chapter of my life to look like, where my kids are out in the world, and maybe I finally, after all these years, have more time to focus on some of my own creative endeavors and things that are like really interesting to me? Or are there shifts that are happening inside of me and things that I wasn't expecting that maybe I want to be, investigating and pursuing? Just to not assume that you know yourself, unless you've done some kind of real checking in. And it's also kind of a nice time to do a little life review. Like, where am I? And what do I want to, like, what do I still want to accomplish? Or how do I want my life to look and feel? What is inspiring to me? They're just all really good questions. And that is why I called the essay and the title of this talk, The Right Questions, like asking yourself the right questions. And part of what happened as well is that, so like last Friday, when my son picked up his cap and gown, it's a tradition at their high school. And I think it's a tradition, it seems that like a lot of people have a similar kind of thing, where you go back to your kid's elementary school, and the whole senior class that went to the same elementary school, they go back in their caps and gowns and they walk through campus, and all the little kids clap for them, and they have signs, and it's wild, and these kids are like, they're looking at their campus from like several feet up now, because they've all, grown and grown and grown. And they were those tiny kids clapping and holding up signs not that long ago. And I think for the seniors, it's also like this moment of, oh, wow, like, whew, this doesn't feel all that long ago. And this is a milestone, right? This is a milestone. I'm heading out into the world. It's a beautiful, touching, moving, and I was just weeping. I was just like, there's just a stream of tears coming out of my eyes like the whole day. And I also saw a whole bunch of moms, like the moms from my old text chat, who I hadn't seen in a while, many of them, because, when your kids go to middle school and high school, like you're not doing the pick up and drop off anymore, depending on where you live and whatever. My kids are able to walk to school, but, you're not seeing each other all the time, and your kids have taken over what homework they need to do or whatever. So there's that text chat it kind of fades out. And so it was really nice to see all these moms, and then a bunch of the kids and moms, we went back to somebody's house for lunch, and the kids were at one table. I'm saying the kids, these are kids I've known since they were 7, and now they're like 17, 18. And the moms, like, we were at one table, and it was just wild because there was this conversation about, wow, like, what's next here? Like we're going to have actual time soon-ish. And some of us have, like I do, like a younger child. We're, still a few years away from that everybody out in the world kind of thing, empty nest syndrome, right? But everybody's on that track now, and I think we were all aware of like how fast it all goes. And some of the women there had kids who were older, and they're already out, so they've been through this one. So it's this a really interesting group of women, and then also like perimenopause and like the sandwich generation, where you have aging parents and teenagers, and you're kind of in the middle of trying to figure out, how do I do all that? And again, not everyone has kids. It's not like we're all going to go through all of these things, but we are all going to go through that moment where our parents are aging, whether we have kids or not. And that is that's a painful season, and stressful and confusing. And sometimes I think there isn't really enough conversation, or it's that we don't pay attention to the conversation until we're in that season ourselves. But that is a very, for me, it was a real shock. And it just so happened, my parents had 20 years between them. My dad was older, and they split when I was 4. So it just was the way the timing worked that I lost them both within 3 years. My mom got ALS, and my dad died of old age, really heart failure, but like he was 96. So I mean, something's probably going to happen eventually, right? Something's going to give out. So it was just the timing, and they were living on different, my mom was in New York, and for a long time my dad was in North Carolina, and then he and his 4th wife moved to Pennsylvania, to an assisted living facility. And then my dad, his wife needed to go into like deeper memory care, and my half sister took him to Georgia, where she was. And then my mom passed away at the end of 2021, and then my half sister passed away like 6 months later, very suddenly and unexpectedly. And then I moved my dad to California, and I was taking care of him for the last year of his life. So it was just a lot of that whilst having teenagers. And so I didn't realize until I was in it how incredibly stretched you just are. Like, how do I show up for everyone here? Like, and and then you have all your sort of like childhood stuff comes to the surface too, because you're losing a parent. And those are just some deep, waters that you're swimming in, and depending on the relationship that you have. And, my relationship with both of my parents was complicated. But I love my mother, like I loved with my entire being. But she was an alcoholic, so that was hard for us. And, I've talked about this, and there were other things too. And my dad, it was very different. Like he, I think, as I've said, a lot of good qualities in there, very interesting person in certain ways, not a good dad. And really, really he just wasn't a good dad. Like he made it impossible for me to have like a normal, happy, secure childhood on any level. And he just like hurt all the women in his life, one after the other. And so I had very mixed feelings about what do I owe him here? Like, what do I owe him? Like, what do I need to do here? And I realized, and this is part of like why I'm bringing this up, is like, that's probably not the right question. I realized as I was grappling with that and thinking about, I've got to move him out here because I can't manage his care while he's like in Georgia and I'm in California and he's 95, and like I'm trying to do things for him, like, fix something in his AT&T account, and they're sending a code to his cell phone and he isn't sending it to me within the 10 minutes before the code expires. So, or like I'm on the phone with Social Security, like trying to change something for him, and I'm on hold 3 hours. And like, he doesn't pick up when I call him, even though we had a plan. Like, I just realized I'm going to have to move him, and that's going to really change my life. And this person wasn't there for me, like, and not only was he not there for me, he really hurt me, and disappointed me and upset me and enraged me. And like, I had to do a lot of therapy because of this man. And so I'm like, oh God, I'm moving him out here, and I'm taking his primary caretaker. Like, do I owe that to him? Like, is that what I need to do now? And I realized that's not the right question, right? So here's exactly what I'm trying to get across today, whether you have kids or you don't. It's like, when you're in this massive moment of, okay, I probably need to make a big change right now, and it's going to have an impact on my life, you want to make sure you're asking yourself the right questions. And for me, at least, the right question was not, what do I owe him? It's, what do I owe myself in order to feel good about what I've done, at the end of this? Like, when I look back on this chapter of kind of walking him home, like Ram Dass, right? We're all just walking each other home. What do I need to do in order to feel at peace with the way that I showed up? That's the right question for me. And that's all I needed. Once I got my head around the right question, then I knew I've got to move him out here. I've got to find a good place for him nearby. And I've got to just, whatever it is, I got to, drive to the valley a few times a week if that's what has to happen, and take him to doctors and make sure he's okay. And now he likes Mott's apple juice of all things. I'm going to make sure he's got a running supply of that. And, oh, he needs to go to the Apple store because he got locked out of his phone. Like, I just was like, all right, this is what I need to do for me, not for him. This is for me so I can feel good later. And so that is what I'm talking about. It's just like, when you're going through these major transitions and you're about to either make a change or a change is upon you, whether you like it or not, what are the questions that you need to be asking yourself so that you can swim through these waters of uncertainty with as much ease and strength as possible? It doesn't mean it's going to be easy or you're going to feel strong all the time. It's just with as much ease and strength as possible. What are the questions I need to ask myself? And even with my dad, when I moved him out here, I had boundaries. Like, I told him, he was not a patient man. And it's very humbling, I think, to get old and to start to lose your grip on things. And I think that my dad was very controlling. And I think for a long time, he really was on top of his things. And when that started to slip, it was frustrating for him and enraging. And he would take out his frustration on me. Sometimes he would curse at me and yell at me. And I told him, I'm like, you cannot speak to me that way. If you speak to me that way, I am not coming to see you this week. I'm not doing that. I will be here for you, and I will take care of you, make sure you have what you need. But if you cannot speak to me, properly, then no, then I won't. I'm not doing anything this week. We'll try again next week. It was like behavior therapy. It's like, and so that's what I really wanted to be addressing in the talk, is just as you move through those major moments in your life where, again, maybe you're like, I've been there, like where you're on the other side of a divorce, right? And you don't know what your life is going to exactly look like. You're not like on your feet just yet. You're figuring out, okay, what is life going to look like now? And where am I, what's the new rhythm going to be? And how is this going to feel? And how is this going to go? To be asking yourself the right questions to set yourself up in the best way that you can, and with as much compassion as you can, and with as much patience as you can. And so those questions might be like, okay, what do I need here to give myself like a little time to heal? Do I need support? Do I need to be trying to find like some new friends? Like what is it that I need right now in order to kind of find my footing? And in the interim, when I don't have my footing, like, can I be kind to myself and give myself a little bit of grace here, because it's understandable that it's uncertain. That's what this is. I'm in this moment. And so whatever it is that you're facing, whether you have kids or you don't, you're definitely going to go through these major transitions in life. And I was listening to Julia Louis-Dreyfus has a fabulous podcast called Wiser Than Me, and she interviews older women, which I'm just so happy that this conversation is finally happening, because I think for so long we have devalued women in our culture once they're sort of like past childbearing years, whether they had children or not. We're just not that, we don't, and it's such a shame, because that's more than half the population, and that's so much wisdom there. And for me, I'm 53, right? At this point in my life, I want to be hearing from women who've already been where I am. I want that wisdom, I want to I want to have access to that. Hey, what was it like for you? And what would you tell your 53-year-old self if you could go back? And, what has your experience been of aging in this culture, or of perimenopause, like where I am? And that's part of what happened when I was sitting at that table with those moms, is that, people were talking about, like, it really is wild. I've spent so much of the last 18 years, my daily life and my mental, attention has been so much on these people I brought into this world. And now that that's shifting, like what am I gonna create? And Jane Fonda was on the Wiser Than Me podcast. She's the first episode. It's fascinating. And she was talking about like her third act, which she thought of as like the first 30 years is your first act, second 30, second, and then you've got, she's like, well, how much past 90 am I going to live? That's my third act. And so when she was 59, she had this like real intense kind of awakening and thought about, what do I want to create in my third act? And these are the conversations that we all need to be having, kids, no kids, whatever the gender. It's like, what am I doing here, right? I've got a finite amount of time. What do I want to be doing with that time and energy? And as you get older, you have fewer, what's to give. You're not bogged down with worry and concern about what other people think, or like, it just doesn't matter anymore. Like, I do not care. Like, I really, I don't. It's like, as long as I am focusing my time and attention on the things that make sense to me and light me up and inspire me, I'm good with me. I'm not worried about anybody else, or what they think, in other words. And I think when I was younger, that was just absolutely not the case. So there's a real freedom that comes from getting older. You know yourself better. You've been through a lot of stuff. That like pretty much whatever life puts in your path, like pretty much, you're gonna be okay, short of like massive tragedy, which may, we've always like count your blessings, right? Like every day that you wake up and you have your health, that's already huge. As long as your loved ones are healthy, that's huge. Those are not small things. It's so easy to take for granted. And I watched with my mother, I just watched this disease come and just take her. It just ravaged her and took her like in a year. It's just, I just never seen anything like it up close like that. It was devastating. And, those motor neuron degenerative diseases, I saw like Celine Dion, like there's a trailer. I was just sobbing because, Julie Andrews, it's like when you see people that are going through these things and you just hear someone who spent their life, expressing themselves, their creative life through their voice, and then they can't sing anymore. They can't speak anymore. It's like, it's devastating, So it's just like to kind of remind yourself, these are conversations we all really ought to be having about where am I right now? And, am I living life in a way that feels good and feels right? And if not, like, what do I need to do? And I know it can be really scary. Sometimes you're asking yourself questions that are terrifying because you're like, well, God, wow, like what? Like, is that a conversation? Like, that's a question that I'm asking myself right now? Like, at my age, like this is a question on my mind, like, and if I were to pursue that question or think about that in reality, so many things would change. And you don't want to deny yourself the exploration, because you do have, as the one thing we know is we have this one life. We don't know after that, but we know we have this one life, and maybe that's it. And if that's it, like, you've got to be living it in a way that feels, inspiring to you and that feels right, not where you can't really let fear rule the day. I mean, you can, but I don't think life is going to feel very good. And so sometimes you're asking yourself questions that bring up a lot of discomfort, a lot of like unease and fear and yikes. But those are still really important questions. If they're arising, there's a reason, there's a reason. And you gotta, I think you've got to look at that stuff and sit with it and let yourself be uncomfortable and let yourself not know, and trust that if you ask yourself the right questions, the right answers are going to come to you. They really are. Otherwise, it's like swimming against the current, and that's exhausting and not sustainable. And so if you can sort of like work with that metaphor of, swimming in these waters of uncertainty and thinking about like the seasons in life and how things change, and sometimes the change in weather is like almost imperceptible. You don't see it at first, and then suddenly you're like, ooh, like, wow, this is what happened, or why is the current pulling on me in this way I really didn't expect? And instead of being scared and trying to like, tread water, to just say, okay, let me just see what this is, let me just see what is pulling on me and why. Let me try to understand myself more. And that's always the key to living with as much ease and strength as possible, is understanding yourself, at least trying, knowing yourself. And so, yeah, I hope this has been like a helpful talk and conversation, and I hope it's got like your wheels spinning, and maybe just like thinking about what are the right questions for me to be asking myself right now, scary or not, and maybe write them down, just write them down. And I don't even mean type, I mean like really write with your hand, get it, like to have that energetic thing where it's in your head and it's coming out of your hand onto a piece of paper in real time, and just let yourself ask the questions. Doesn't mean you have to do anything, but just like let yourself at least ask the questions, and I'm always here if you want to talk about any of this more. And I'm sending you lots of love and hoping that the waters that you're swimming in are, not too rough, certainly. And if they are, then I hope that you're feeling the trust in yourself and the faith in yourself that you're going to get through it. And that's sometimes the best expression of love that we can offer to ourselves and to all the people in our lives that we care about the most. Like that trust, like my son in September, I'm going to leave him at college at a certain point. I'm going to drive him up there and get him settled, and they're going to make me leave. I'm not going to go live in college, right? So we have to like drive away at a certain point and trust, like he's going to be okay. He's facing uncertainty and an unknown, but I've given him everything I possibly can to set him up for it. And I have absolute faith in him and myself, that I can handle the unknown and some uncertainty, because I've done it before. And so yeah, until next time, I hope that you are well.